For more than 20 years, one question has puzzled NASCAR fans. What really happened to Dale Earnhardt Sr. on that sad February day in 2001? The Intimidator, the man who seemed like he could never get hurt behind the wheel, was gone in a second during what should have been a normal crash at Daytona. But new detective work and investigations have finally shown us the shocking truth. And it's not what anyone wanted to hear. This isn't a story about fate or bad luck. It's about mistakes that could have been stopped that cost racing its greatest legend. Today, we're looking deep into the mystery that changed NASCAR forever, exploring the man behind the legend and finding out the sad truth of what could have been avoided. But to understand what really happened that day, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to a small factory town in North Carolina where a young boy watched his father risk his life every weekend on dirt tracks that most people had never heard of. Ralph Dale Earnhardt was born on April 29, 1951 in Kannapolis, North Carolina. This wasn't fancy NASCAR country. This was blue-collar mill worker territory where people worked hard, played harder, and racing was something you did on weekends if you could scrape together enough money for gas and parts. His father, Ralph Earnhardt, was already making a name for himself on the local short-track circuit, but like most racers of that time, he was doing it with very little money and pure determination. Here's what most people don't know about young Dale. He was stubborn from day one. While other kids were playing with toys, Dale was hanging around his father's garage, learning everything he could about engines, how air moves around cars, and the mind games of racing. His father actually tried to talk him out of racing, knowing firsthand how dangerous and expensive the sport could be. But Dale had made up his mind. And when Dale Earnhardt made up his mind about something, there was no changing it. The decision that would shape his entire life came when he was just a teenager. Against his father's wishes and his teacher's advice, Dale quit high school to chase racing full-time. Most people thought he was crazy. His father was angry. But Dale had seen something that others hadn't. He understood that racing was changing from a weekend hobby into a real sport, and he wanted to be ready when that change happened. The early years were tough. Dale worked construction jobs during the week and raced on weekends, often sleeping in his car at the track because he couldn't afford a hotel room. He was racing with worse equipment against drivers who had better cars and bigger budgets. But he had something they didn't have. An almost magical ability to make a car do things it wasn't supposed to do. Other drivers would shake their heads watching Dale take an average car and somehow find speed that the engineers said wasn't there. His big break came in 1975 when he made his Winston Cup debut at the World 600 in Charlotte. This wasn't just any race. It was the longest, most difficult test on the NASCAR calendar. While other rookies were just hoping to finish, Dale was studying every veteran driver on the track, learning their lines, understanding their strategies, and quietly planning his attack on the sports establishment. But here's where the story gets interesting and where we start to see the traits that would both make Dale a legend and ultimately contribute to his downfall. Even as a rookie, Dale had an almost reckless confidence in his own abilities. He would take chances that other drivers wouldn't take, push his car beyond its limits, and somehow make it work. His fellow drivers started calling him crazy, but they also started getting out of his way. The breakthrough moment came in 1979 during his official rookie season. Dale didn't just win Rookie of the Year. He completely changed what a rookie could accomplish, finishing 7th in points and winning his first race at Bristol. But more importantly, he told every veteran driver in the sport that the landscape was about to change dramatically. By the early 1980s, something amazing was happening in NASCAR. Dale Earnhardt wasn't just winning races. He was completely changing how the game was played. While other drivers were happy to race carefully and wait for opportunities, Dale was creating opportunities through sheer force of will and an aggressive driving style that was right on the edge of acceptable. The transformation really began when he joined Richard Childress Racing in 1981. This partnership would become the stuff of legend. But in the beginning, it was just two ambitious men who shared a simple philosophy. Winning wasn't everything. It was the only thing. Childress gave Dale competitive equipment. And Dale provided something that couldn't be bought. A killer instinct that separated champions from also-rans. The first championship came in 1980, but it was the 1986 season that announced Dale Earnhardt as a force of nature. He didn't just win 5 races that year. He dominated in a way that hadn't been seen in the modern era. But more importantly, he developed a psychological edge over his competitors that went beyond pure speed. Other drivers started making mistakes when Dale was in their rear-view mirror. Crew chiefs started making safe strategy calls when they saw the black number 3 car approaching. Dale had turned intimidation into a weapon in a way that no driver before or since has managed to copy. The GM Goodwrench sponsorship deal in 1988 created the iconic image that would define NASCAR for the next decade and beyond. The all-black number 3 car wasn't just scary. It was a rolling psychological warfare machine. Dale understood that racing was as much about what happened between the ears as what happened between the white lines. He built an image of being unbeatable that became real. When other drivers believed he was unbeatable, he often became exactly that. The championship streak that followed was unprecedented. 1986, 1987, 1990, 1991, 1993, 1994, 6 championships in 9 years. But here's what made Dale truly special. It wasn't just that he won, it's how he won. He would find ways to win races that he had no business winning. His car would be handling poorly. His engine would be down on power. His pit crew would make mistakes. And somehow Dale would still find a way to the front when it mattered most. The rivalries during this era became the stuff of NASCAR legend. The battles with Darrell Waltrip, Rusty Wallace, Jeff Gordon, and others weren't just competitions. They were gladiator contests that lifted the entire sport. But Dale always seemed to have that extra gear when the pressure was highest. His competitors would later admit that racing against Dale Earnhardt was unlike racing against anyone else because you never knew what he might do. And you were never sure if your own car could handle whatever move he was planning. But success came with a price that few people understood at the time. The same aggressive instincts that made Dale a champion also made him increasingly resistant to changes that might hurt his competitive edge. This included safety equipment that he felt might slow him down or make him less effective behind the wheel. It was a mindset that would have tragic consequences. But in the glory years of the late 80s and early 90s, it seemed like Dale Earnhardt could survive anything the sport could throw at him. For all of Dale Earnhardt's success, there was one race that seemed determined to escape him, and it was the one race that mattered most to NASCAR fans, the Daytona 500. This wasn't just any race. It was the Super Bowl of stock car racing, and Dale's inability to win it had become the defining story of his career. The heartbreak started early and seemed to follow a cruel pattern. Dale would dominate at Daytona during speed weeks, setting fast times in practice, winning qualifying races, and looking absolutely unbeatable. Then race day would arrive and something would go wrong: mechanical failures, strategic mistakes, freak accidents, late race cautions that shuffled the field. It seemed like the racing gods had conspired to keep Dale Earnhardt out of victory lane at NASCAR's most important race. The 1990 Daytona 500 was particularly crushing. Dale led with 5 laps to go when a cut tire sent him into the wall, handing the victory to D. Reich Cope. The 1993 race saw Dale leading on the final lap before Dale Jarrett got a run and passed him for the win. In 1995, Sterling Marlin got into the back of Dale's car, causing him to lose control and hit the wall while leading late in the race. Each failure was more painful than the last, and the story began to take on a life of its own. NASCAR fans and media started calling it the Daytona curse. Dale's competitors began to whisper that maybe he just wasn't meant to win the sport's biggest race. Some suggested that his aggressive driving style worked against him at Daytona, where patience and smart thinking were often more important than raw speed and intimidation. Others wondered if the pressure of 20 years of failure was getting to the man who seemed immune to pressure everywhere else. But Dale never stopped believing it would happen. In interviews, he would talk about the Daytona 500 with the kind of quiet confidence that had carried him through 6 championships. He knew his time would come, and he was willing to wait as long as it took. What he didn't know was that when it finally happened, it would set in motion the events that would lead to his death just 3 years later. February 15, 1998, the 40th running of the Daytona 500. Dale had dominated the sport for nearly 2 decades, but he had never won its crown jewel. At 46 years old, time was running out. The field was younger, hungrier, and faster than ever before. This might be his last real chance. The race itself was vintage Earnhardt. He wasn't the fastest car. He didn't lead the most laps, but when it mattered most, he was there. With 20 laps to go, Dale was running third and looking for an opportunity. With 10 laps to go, he moved to second and started stalking leader Bobby Labonte. With 5 laps to go, Dale made his move. And suddenly, the black number 3 was out front where it belonged. The final 5 laps felt like forever. Every NASCAR fan in America was holding their breath, waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for the curse to strike again. But this time was different. This time, Dale Earnhardt crossed the finish line first, and 20 years of frustration and heartbreak melted away in an instant. The celebration that followed was unlike anything NASCAR had ever seen. Pit crews from competing teams lined Pittsburgh Road to congratulate Dale as he took his victory lap. Drivers who had spent years battling him on the track stopped to shake his hand. Even the media members who had covered his Daytona failures for 2 decades seemed genuinely emotional about finally getting to write the story they had always wanted to write. What nobody realized that day was that Dale's greatest triumph had also removed the last barrier between him and death. The Daytona 500 victory had completed his legacy, but it had also eliminated his primary motivation for making the safety changes that might have saved his life 3 years later. The 2001 Daytona 500 started like a celebration. Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, the team that Dale had built around his own racing legacy, had their cars running at the front of the pack. Dale Earnhardt Jr., his son and heir apparent, was leading the race. Michael Waltrip, Dale's good friend and DEI teammate, was running second. And Dale Sr., driving the iconic black number 3 car, was running third and playing the role he had perfected over 2 decades, the protector. This was vintage Dale Earnhardt strategy. He wasn't necessarily trying to win the race himself. He was using his car as a moving roadblock to prevent other drivers from catching his teammates. It was a selfless act that showed how much Dale's priorities had evolved. The man who had once been focused solely on his own success was now using his legendary skills to help the next generation achieve theirs. For most of the race, everything went according to plan.